November the 4th. This is the IPS morning deprogram. I just wanted to follow up on one of the threads, one of the conversations from last night on the Fakeologist show. So we were talking about the baseball player Alejandro Kirk and how there's been these strangely, you could even say ironic, which was a word used on another story we were talking about, where it was ironic that the police were training on that train for a mass stabbing and then it happens. So it wasn't an eerie coincidence. No, that's when the movies foreshadow it. When it's a drill mirroring it or foreshadowing it, it's just ironic. Yeah, it is ironic that the places that do the drills seemingly are the worst prepared because they're the ones always getting hit by whatever it is they're drilling for. I wonder what that relationship could imply. So we were talking about the significance, though, of Alexander Kirk, first brought to my attention by Morpheus, when, we're talking about the baseball game, the Dodgers, and you got this player whose name is obviously Kirk, which obviously stands out because of the whole Charlie Kirk thing. And we were talking about the significance of every propaganda conduit available being used to force me ideas out there, names out there. Thus, Charlie Sheen, comeback tour 9/10, showing up on JRE to promote his Netflix release, just called Charlie. So you have the name Charlie out there. He's on the #1 podcast. They're talking about JFK and Lee Harvey Oswald and about getting sniped. Joe Rogan says it was a nice shot, referring to Charlie Sheen, describing somebody sniping him from the balcony with some kind of a projectile. So what we're talking about here is that it's not just movies. This is a echo chamber that's created. It's inescapable. And there's no reason to think that sports would be off limits, sports entertainment. And we often talk about World Wrestling Entertainment, which is admittedly kayfabe, admittedly fake, although they didn't admit it right away, but it's admittedly fake. But we're supposed to treat the rest of the sports universe as completely objective and free of any kind of ulterior agenda or motivation. I mean, it's all part of the same bread and circuses, right? So why would we think sports are exempt? So that's kind of my starting point here. So we see this image brought to me of Alejandro Kirk, where he's described as a pain in the neck. So already it's funny. Kirk, pain in the neck. And the photo of this Kirk guy, they're dumping like Gatorade on him. And it's spilling in a stream, squirting out as though it's being squibbed out of his neck. So we're like, okay, that's just weird. That's a little strange. Well, then he finds other more recent examples where Kirk gets hit by a ball. You see a 9/10 behind him. So Kirk gets hit, exits the game. So you have these headlines that could equally apply to Charlie Kirk. They're even putting up Alejandro Kirk murals. So I'm like, okay, there's some overlapping here. What's going on? So the final game of the World Series, he's at bat, and the pitch counter's on 33. So technically it's the 34th pitch. But for those who are nitpicking, it doesn't even matter. The fact of it is, the name is Kirk. He's already been in these ironic headlines. And then the bat breaks, like the neck of the bat. So the bat breaks and they leave it on the field. And someone had pointed out that if you look at the podium, or rather the tent where Charlie Kirk was when he was squibbed, it looked just like a home plate. It was a 5-sided polygon, but it was like a home plate, like baseball. And so you have this baseball player, his bat breaking, they leave it on the field, just broken there. And so you got broken bat, Kirk, 33 on the screen, which obviously we see this as a typical hoax code. They caught the shooter 33 hours after. And these aren't the only examples. I didn't do the deep dive. Morpheus did. He found all kinds of strange things. like the name Tyler, etc. So how does this work? So someone had called in and they said, well, can you be open-minded enough to consider this might just be a coincidence? And I have to remind them that the default position is that these are only coincidences. That's the default. That's the non-thinking, closed informational system, no additional perspectives, the built-in assumption. So by definition, to say it's only a coincidence is closed-minded. By definition, just to be clear. So if we're looking at additional information, the wider media ecosystem, and the possibility that the sports are also being used to echo the psyops, then why should this be any different than what you see with World Wrestling Entertainment? What would make it any different? Especially when you get into the specifics of these references. Kirk getting hit, exiting the game, Kirk's bat breaking. So combined with that and the pictures of him, it just seems like there's some kind of a relationship. And when we see this in movies, I refer to these as predictive programming proxies, where you have somebody in a movie, let's say Francis Ford Coppola's latest movie, Megalopolis, where the protagonist, Caesar Catalina, obviously represents Trump. You could point to many other movies like this, like Mickey 17, where the main character is Trump. Biff Tannen is Trump. So he is a mirror in fiction, but contained in the character are elements that will, in fact, or are concurrently reflecting in the real character. So this just implies that there's a level of scripting in these sporting events that are somehow used for the same purposes as everything else. Telling a story, but reiterating it in many different contexts. So again, I'm open to it just being coincidence, but if we're going to go with that, we have to say it's certainly an interesting coincidence. And then to that, I have to ask, why would we look at sports as 100% objective when everything else within the PSYOP entertainment complex is completely subject to the worldview monopoly and all of its machinations, its subliminals, its influence operations, and psyops? So I would say we should be open-minded to the idea that they are manipulating the entire media ecosystem. And, it reminds me of Damar Hamlin. If you recall that particular event, these PR stunts that are platformed, in the sports. But again, this Alejandro Kirk, the bat breaking, getting hit by a ball, the headlines, the ironic headlines, the pain in the neck. Once is a coincidence, twice happenstance, three times enemy action, Ian Fleming. Like, there's a point where you can kind of rule in, and this is another point too. It's kind of an axiom. There are no coincidences. Now, on the world stage, because there are coincidences, there are connections. Not all connections are significant. You can use all kinds of gematria calculators and make connections. You can retrofit things, but those aren't meaningful connections. Those are manufactured. But on the world stage, we're talking about the context of manipulated media. So, for example, any sort of area where there's a propaganda influence would be part of that world stage. So within a movie, for example, there's no coincidences. Whatever happens at the end of the movie was in the script. So it's scripted in advance. You can rule out coincidence. When it comes to a staged events are not the result of coincidences. These are scripted. The drama, the soap opera with Erica Kirk and having leather hot pants and hugging J.D. Vance. Yeah, that's all according to script. And as I pointed out, the Erica Kirk script perfectly matches the widow in the Hulu show who takes over the Young Republicans. And all this reference to J.D. Vance, VP, it all ties into this Vice President Kirk, where it's Elizabeth Kirk in 2025's Heads of State, starring the actress who's next to Charlie Kirkland when he's shot in the neck. So there's this overlapping relationship between entertainment and fake events. And so what this really raises the question for me is, are all sports compromised in the same way as the movies are? So then you can say, well, no, it's impossible. It's impossible that a bat could have broken like that. I'm not so sure. You know, you can be incredulous, but if your personal incredulity is the basis of your opinion, we should just ignore it. The opinion onto whether or not a bat can be broken on command would need a little more information to back it up. Like, have you looked into special effects? If you were making a movie and you needed a scene where the bat broke, would the special effects department be up to the task? Like, is it unachievable? People seem to forget we live in a magic show. And then someone is asking, what's your best evidence that Charlie Kirk was squibbed? Is it the air poofing up? Is it the way his body moves? Is it there a tube? And to that I have to answer, we can't rely on glitches. We can't rely on them being sloppy and goofing up so we see the squib. Like, we should just assume they're going to get better and they're going to achieve perfection when it comes to the visual aspects thanks to AI. So knowing that, we know it's a squib because it wasn't a bullet and it wasn't a real shooting. A squib is just simply a way of deploying fake blood. If it wasn't real blood, it was fake blood. It's that simple. Whether or not you can see the squib is immaterial. You don't need evidence for a squib because the squib is implied by the fakery. You just need to have reason to think it was fake to therefore rule in squib as the only way of deploying a gush of blood. Now, some have suggested it could be CGI or something. And one possible way that could be done, if that was the way they were to do it, would be to have total control over the camera persons. So the people in the audience with the cameras would be recording it, and they would have some kind of a Snapchat filter. And they're all using the same one. So they all get the same effect, and they're the ones who upload the video. Personally, having looked at different angles of it, I think that's highly unlikely. I don't overestimate how advanced the computer-generated graphics are. Someone had said to me, maybe the whole thing was CGI. And yeah, I mean, you could argue that maybe the whole thing was just computer-generated, but that raises many more questions than it answers. And if true, if such a thing were true, and you could prove it, you would break the internet. But those types of claims don't really ever come with evidence, because there's no random clip of that day you can point at to me and say, I can tell that's CGI because of this. If things ever get to that point, we're kind of screwed. But we're not there yet. And if you think we are, you haven't worked with AI. I mean, it is good. And we shouldn't be making arguments from, well, maybe what they have is like way more advanced. Because if we're inserting technology that doesn't exist yet to explain something that's hard to explain, we're falling into the divine fallacy, the God of the gaps, which basically means anything that you can't explain, you insert something, high tech or divine, that doesn't necessarily have any evidence to back it up. So no, I would need to see some something to support that, but also to suggest that a public event with 3,000 people, the starting off of the American Comeback Tour, didn't happen would actually require a great deal of investigative reportage. You'd have to find out, were there any Ubers? Was the cafeteria open? Call the university. There's a lot of homework involved. So one point I like to make is, if you're going to make extraordinary claims, it's only polite to do your homework. I had someone say on Twitter, they were like, if Charlie Kirk was really going around colleges and he was popular and he was talking to people, there'd be more than 1 or 2 clips on YouTube. Right? It's like, well, no, your whole loaded premise there is that you haven't seen additional clips, so we should consider a possibility that he never actually went on tour. Well, maybe you weren't part of his target demo. Maybe you're not a young Christian Republican. Because I've been following Turning Point USA, I've been following Human Events, I've been following anybody in the right-wing, alt-right, woke-right podcast sphere I had been following very closely. So he was not a mystery to me. I knew who he was. He came through Albuquerque last August, and I had considered showing up as at Legacy Church and trying to get a question in. But my point of it is, we're not the ones who say everything's fake. We're not the ones who say birds are fake. And you have to remember, the birds are fake conspiracy theory was started by one of the Parkland students to make people who call the shootings fake look crazy. So I'm not going to be looking crazy. And you look crazy when you make an extraordinary claim and you don't back it up, but you kind of hope the person hearing you tries to prove you wrong. Like, that's not how it works. Like, Bigfoot's real, prove me wrong. Go to the, it's like, no, you should be taking a picture. Critterfest says, Tim, isn't it true that there are computers and magnets in footballs now? There's plenty of videos where you can see balls, whether it's footballs or soccer balls, that even golf balls, where there does seem to be, especially with the goalposts and with basketballs and the rims, there does seem to be some kind of chicanery involved using magnets. Impossible passes, catches. There's something up. I'm not saying it's being used, but how would you know? I need to watch that movie. I think it's called Him, about people selling their souls in the sports industries. But, in football in particular, it's about some kind of sacrifice. But maybe all you're sacrificing is your integrity, because now you're part of a clique of bread and circus clowns deceiving the masses. And aren't they all on performance-enhancing drugs anyway? I mean, why should we consider any of it to be totally legit? And I'm not against it. I'm not against sports or athletics. I'm ambivalent. But the question we are raising here is simply, is it reasonable to think that Alejandro Kirk's conspicuously ironic headline after headline are deliberate? The bat breaking, was that deliberate? Well, I think if it's deliberate that Charlie Sheen was talking about getting sniped and talking about JFK when the Kirk thing happened, I think if it's deliberate that Erica Kirk and Charlie Kirk played out the characters from Hulu's The Tempest, I think if we look at all the rest of the content regarding Charlie Kirk and Erica Kirk, this entire soap opera, I don't think we should rule out the idea that Alejandro Kirk, for whatever reason, is some kind of a useful propaganda conduit for force memeing certain idea clusters, namely Kirk, neck, getting hit. Now, it was the 34th pitch. We talked about it last night. Somebody said 33, but the pitch counter's on 33, so you can look. Not that it matters, but again, we're just seeing these consistent patterns, and it's funny at a minimum. And so you might just be inclined to say, oh, it's just a funny coincidence, and the universe has got a sense of humor. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's either that. Either the universe has a sense of humor, or we're looking at scripted events. And the writers are funny as hell. But I was looking up Kirk and mural, Kirk hit, Kirk neck. And I'm just finding articles with both Charlie Kirk and Alejandro Kirk kind of overlapping. I'm like, what is this about? What's up, Deja Vision? Yeah, just doing a follow-up to last night's talk with Fakeologist. So we also were talking about drills, because there was a mass stabbing on a train, and the headline talked about how ironic it was that they had done a drill for such an event. And again, I have to ask, why is it that the places that do drills for things seem to be the least prepared? It's like, you guys just practiced for a mass stabbing, and then somebody goes in and does a mass stabbing. It says that the drills don't work. Like, if your workplace has a drill for something, it's probably going to happen there. Someone suggests that I should start live streaming. Art, basically. I have an art channel I could do separately. So I'm trying to decide if I want to do that. I mean, I'm always up in the mornings, like right now. I kind of flip my schedule. I think I'm going to be a bit more nocturnal. Less traffic. But I'm spending a few hours each day working on a series of landscapes, so it's not really related to IPS. So I'm thinking about starting a separate YouTube channel for it. I did a beta test yesterday, but it wasn't live. I was just pre-recording. And I feel like if I'm live, it's probably better. I'm a little more guardrailed because there's people in the chat I'm bouncing off of. And so yesterday I deleted it because I think I said too much. So we were talking about drills, concurrent drills. Okay, that's another thing too. So again, those who say that we're merely pointing out coincidences have nothing to stand on thanks to the Erica Kirk conundrum. And if you haven't seen Hulu's The Tempest, you may not know the full extent of it. But every sort of characterization attached to her right now is right out of this TV show. And the interrelated movies. I mean, it is ridiculously obvious here now. And Candace Owens finally addressed the idea that Charlie Kirk was not dead, but in a very dismissive way. She said the reason people think so is because everybody's acting so inauthentic about it, and she referenced the grieving widow not really looking that grievy, not looking all that bereaved. And again, just friendly reminder, Candace Owens is not an investigator. She doesn't have a magnifying glass. She's not walking around the campus at Utah trying to find out who the real shooter was. No, she in fact is a propagandist and a storyteller. And she drops a few clues, gets your reaction, everyone gets mad at her, and then she goes deeper. Well-paved rabbit trails, no new intel. Everything that we're hearing from her is completely scripted and fake. It's not like authentic research. Like, let's find out what Candace Owens discovered. Like, that's not how it works. That's not actually how it has ever worked, whether mainstream or alternative. All these fake investigative reporters, like Project Veritas. And I believe that's where Candace Owens got her start. Project Veritas. So these are like these, they do undercover stuff and they expose stuff, but everything they expose is just like mainstream intrigue. But they never address anything real like, oh, by the way, nobody died at this event. Like, they can't go there because they exist within the fictional universe. They exist within the Truman Show, and so they respond to all of its narratives as though they are literally true. But I think she's part of a PSYOP troupe, like an actor's troupe. She's part of a PSYOP group with Kanye or Kanye West, the White Lives Matter thing. And White Lives Matter, was there a meme they pushed, but it's essentially the basis of woke right. If somebody's pushing woke right ideology, whether it's J-Pill or depopulation, the depopulation people aren't really worried about depopulation. They're like, we're running out of people. I'm like, don't worry about it. There's a bunch of immigrants coming. They're like, no, we don't want the immigrants. It's like, wait a minute, I thought you wanted more people. And they're always like, the immigrants are going to outbreed us. Our replacement rate's too low. So it's like, okay, so you're only worried about certain people. And again, White Lives Matter, white genocide, that's woke right ideology. It's a grotesque mirror reflection of woke leftism. And that's why there was such a push to turn the subway girl, Ierna Zaruski, into the new George Floyd before everybody stopped caring about her because Charlie got it the next day. What's up, Kenley? Thanks for joining. Plain Dakota says she came into the limelight after her first appearance on Rogan. Yeah, probably. She was probably platformed. I mean, these people are platformed for these purposes. It's just they're misconstrued. We think of them as they're like Tucker Carlson too, but Candace in particular. She gets kicked off Daily Wire because she wants to tell the real truth. And that's basically going against the party line at Daily Wire, which is pro-Israel. So she makes this very public break from neocon right to woke right. And that division has been highlighted starkly since 10/7. Since October 7th, there's been a pretty big split where you can see, okay, where they are on the right, because there's this perfect split down the middle. And the left isn't like that. The left doesn't distance itself from Antifa. They just say Antifa doesn't exist, which is kind of funny. But the right definitely has a schism here between the woke right and the mainstream right. They want to disown them. Like, the mainstream right are mad at Tucker Carlson for doing an interview with Nick Fuentes and not asking any hard questions. But again, these are all positions that these actors take. And yeah, they're more actors than politicos. Yeah, they're into politics, they're into the drama, but they have certain narrative structures they adhere to, and they do not cross these lines. And it's predictable. Like, just yesterday, Marjorie Taylor Greene was in the news for saying that aliens are fallen angels. So if you go down the list on the political horseshoe left-right, you'll find that the woke right, more so than the regular right, which are more mainstream, the woke right will see AI as evil and aliens as demons. The left embraces progressivism, the right more traditional values. And so you have this interesting split here, and I've called it out before, and I called this out quite some time ago. But in like the last year, Tucker Carlson has said aliens are actually demons. His friend at the Pentagon told him, and they work for the Democrats. A demon got into his bed and scratched his back and left a 14-inch scar. And then Candace Owens comes out and she says AI is demonic, that Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Sam Altman are AI demon androids who don't even bleed. And she said demons are real. That's a quote. She said they sacrifice children to summon the demons. And then I guess they upload the demons into Grok. But my point of it is, these opinions are only going to come from the woke right. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a big red pill pusher, when she comes out and she says that aliens are fallen angels, it's because of where she is in that box. You're not going to hear a leftist liberal say, I think that the aliens are fallen angels. They'll go more with the standard view of science, that it's logical to conclude that we're not the most intelligent species out there, and if they are going to come, they're more likely benefactors or future versions of us. The left will embrace the aliens, which is why Tucker Carlson made the point to say that they've made secret deals with the deep state, because deep state is euphemism for Democrats. So my point of it is, aliens as a construct are like angels to the progressive atheist left. So isn't it interesting that the angels to the left, the aliens, are demons to the right? Not a coincidence. So I'm talking about this political bifurcation, and the split is perfect. This is why Marjorie Taylor Greene is advocating for banning chemtrails. But then she also thinks that climate change is a laughable hoax. Well, that's because climate change is a left-wing orthodoxy and anti-geoengineering is on the right. So chemtrail belief is actually anti-engineering. So you got pro-geoengineering, anti-geoengineering. And as I often say, if you're on an anti on anything, you're inside of their world stage. You're actually contained within the political horseshoe. So I always advocate you take the anti-anti and the anti-pro. If you're like, I'm really anti the pokey, I'm really anti-Fauci, it's like, that's cool. But if you call yourself an anti, if you take part in that activism, you're lumped in with all the brainwashees who are all red pill, which is actually a subset of the J pill. So you're putting yourself in a box where you're fully contained, and you're just basically participating in a steam valve. You're not even engaging in any meaningful activism. So the only legitimate position to take is the non. Like, if you don't drink and smoke, are you an anti-drinker, anti-smoker? No, you're a non. So you can be a non-participant. ATTA says, slow down. My rate of speech? I just got back from the gym, and then I had probably too much coffee beforehand. So if I sound a little excited or something, it's probably that. Armin Ross says, the world stage performs synchronized collusion, performing an initiation of the population like cults. The group performance causes emotional response and funnels perception to the desired. Well, the bread and circuses is not just a metaphor. It's quite literally how this thing works. Entertainment, religion, government. I'm sorry, but like, where's the barriers in between these various departments? But what we do see is as far as the world stage goes, is it's tightly compartmentalized. So you can tell me one opinion you have on any political horseshoe item, and I will be able to relay to you all your other opinions. And it shouldn't work that way. But it comes down to point of view. And these are things that you can't really be in denial about. So within the main program, The mainstream point of view is going to be the one that gives you the same answers that ChatGPT will, or Wiki. Meaning anything you ask is going to go through a very specific filter. And that specific filter contains every premise set by mainstream media going back in time. So you have PSYOP-infused news cycle after PSYOP-infused news cycle, bending the news, bending our consensus agreement on what reality is into something that has diverged from purely objective reality. So within the world stage, it's actually a closed informational system, and you could look at this as a fictional universe. So for example, Marvel superheroes is a fictional universe, the Marvel comic universe. It looks like Earth. It functions in every way like our world, except you have superheroes. And you have very specific superheroes. It doesn't mix with Star Wars or any other fictional universe. So that's the concept. So when you look at the news presents a version of the world with fictions added onto it. Fake events, fake threats, perhaps even fake weapons of mass destruction, fake scenarios. So if you look at these fake things as like the superheroes, the anomalies, the augmentations to what we experience objectively, you can look at how the mainstream media is in fact a fictional universe. Now, if your perspective is that you can't trust the mainstream, you become alternative media, well, actually half the ecosystem is alternative, but it's still contained within the same box or same parameters. And it is resting upon the edifice of fakery, uncorrected, unchecked, unadulterated, fake news, infused news cycles. So what happens to news after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Well, eventually it becomes history. So now you can look at the perspective here of history bending, the long-term effects, the long-term process of inculcating our worldview into us with certain things that don't actually exist. So you have a lot of people who are essentially in it's tantamount to a religious paradigm. So now our perspective recognizes this big pile of bullshit. So where does that leave us? Well, we're out here. We're looking at the world stage as such. But the skeptic does not judge something immediately. They suspend judgment till they get more facts. So when we're presented with a story with the potential to steer the entire news cycles, we tend to look at these things very critically. And in our assessment, what we include that the mainstreamers and the alternative do not is we include, were there any squibs, special effects, predictive/concurrent programming, hoax indicators. And we have a list of items that we run through as we assess whether or not we can trust this particular story or not. And if not, then we take the position of non-believers. So the people who believe the stories know less than those of us who do not. And that's because they're not including this additional information. That's not their perspective. That's not what ChatGPT will give you. That's not what Wiki will give you. So we have a distinctly different, qualitatively different perspective on mediated events. And the conspiracy theorists are deluded. All the believers in Candace Owens, I mean, they're all foolish. Because whether you're mainstream or alternative, you're part of their closed informational system built upon a world of lies, and all her rabbit trails have been paved in advance. They're not going to find their way off the world stage. Because one other point, the conspiracy theories, red pill, J pill, all these conspiracy theory ideologies are actually a subset of the mainstream. So we refer to it as MSM plus. So if you're in a subset, you're in a deeper layer of programming. So our perspective, the off-world stage perspective, is distinct in that we recognize that the consensus model is a model. It shouldn't be mistaken for objective. So if you're going to default to, well, if it's on the news, it's real, you're operating under the false premise that the news media is objective. And by objective, I mean that the cameras are objective. Like, we know the reporters are not. We know they have biases. We know that they lie, they manipulate. We get that. But the base assumption that what the camera is showing you is actually what's happening in the world, that the media is a window to the world, that needs to go, because that's not how it works. Seeing should not be believing. And even on that, most truthers will call something fake because they say it looks fake. That's not going to be a good methodology moving forward, as generative AI makes the fakery go away and it becomes indistinguishable from real. So you'll need a better set of tools. And the better set of tools are available if you pick up the Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed, a Skeptics Guide to the Theater of Psywar. And by tools, it's really a philosophical framework for media consumption in an active way, and how to process the information without getting manipulated into believing things that aren't true. So it's about breaking away from the habit of being a believer in media and knowing what is true and knowing what is not true. And they would rather not have you capable of knowing real from fake. They want you to defer to the experts. It's a power dynamic they've set up. I'm thinking that the visual illiteracy that we're all being brought into is a power disparity. That we're basically being led into a new dark age without even knowing it. And we're lucky right now, we're fortunate that we are appraised of what we are as far as the fakeability factor. Kenley says, like Elon's fake car in space, it's so real it looks fake. World stage clown show. Yeah, and Musk is an interesting character overall, because when you get down to it, the space program has always been about the inner space, the space between your ears and your worldview. And the cult the symbolism of the cult that we're always pointing out, the sun worship, it's all been repackaged. The pageantry's been repackaged. And one of their oldest symbols that you see on all the Masonic graves is the obelisk, like the Washington Monument. And it seems like what they have done with the modern rocket and the iconography, the symbolism, the numbers, it's all there, is they have just repackaged the obelisk, the symbol of the earth god and ascension into heaven, with the rocket that ascends into space. So you've got Pope Elon, again, Elon, the first colonizer of Mars in Wernher von Braun's book, building a structure analogous to that in Rome. So what I think we have here are in a way, you could say the priesthood. They're presenting a worldview, only it's a science fiction-y version of the old world order's worldview. The old gods have been repackaged under God constructs. The obelisk symbolizing resurrection and ascension has been replaced by an obelisk that actually flies. Heaven is an old concept that has been brought back as space and becoming multiplanetary. And the idea of space and science fiction is this utopian endeavor that we're all engaged in. Yeah, that's all just part of our worldview, and the notion that if we can all just live in harmony, we can all, perfect the system. Like, I think that is the point of the space program, is pageantry and worldview establishment. Man walking on the moon, that was just a miracle. Because the psyops each serve a purpose. When you look at all the fake events, they serve purpose. Some of them are terrorism. Some of them are to divide us into these two categories. Others are myths. They create martyrs. They create myths and miracles. Jacques says, I saw your fakeologist last night. Yeah, we were just kind of reiterating on some of the things here, because we were noticing this Alejandro Kirk and all the headlines associating him with Charlie Kirk, whether he's called a pain in the neck. You got the Gatorade that seems to be squirting out of his neck. He's hit with the ball. Kirk gets hit, has to get off the field. World Series ends, his bat breaks, like the neck of the bat. Pitch counter has 3-3 on it. So we're asking, could this be additional predictive or concurrent programming, but showing up in sports, the way we see stuff in movies and in podcasts? And I'm saying it's not a stretch if we look at how World Wrestling Entertainment has been used for the same. So is there a distinction to be made between NFL, NBA, MLB, and WWE when it comes to their use in the bread and circuses? And I would kind of say no. I don't think it's unreasonable. And the name Kirk showing up in such a conspicuous way, it's just either the universe has an ironic sense of humor, or we're seeing more examples of compromised entertainment. But if you want to believe that sports are the one area that Big Brother won't touch, yeah, they're going to get into the cartoons, the movies, the comics. They're going to completely pollute your mind, contaminate every news cycle with agenda. Complete saturation, mass media echo chamber, concerted messaging, forced memes. They paint the zeitgeist daily, and no matter what you're doing, you're exposed to it. Like, I don't want to watch politics, so I'm going to watch Hulu. And then you see some leader of the Republicans get his neck shot. It's like, you might as well have been watching politics. But we've seen this so often. I'm like, oh, look, Roe v. Wade leak. You got feminists protesting their right to abort. And then I'm like, okay, this is old. I'm going to watch something else. I turn on HBO, House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, opening scene. The queen is dying in childbirth because they need the male heir. And even though she's the most powerful woman in the kingdom, she's still just a broodmare for the state. So I'm like, okay, it's the same message, no matter what platform. But let's go ahead and pretend like baseball is pure. Adam Cook says, AI, in my sometimes humble opinion, won't become an evil overlord, but a reflection of anything we've inputted into the net until the polarities of knowledge and ignorance level off and we're distilled. You know, I've been thinking lately that all of the conditioning we've experienced for alien invasion, you know, ultimately, when you look at these alien invasion scenarios, it results in a higher intelligence taking over. That's kind of the overall theme, higher intelligence. Well, what if the AI invasion is the alien invasion? Like, in other words, what if the aliens have always just been a metaphor, but that what we're really going to collectively confront is something that is more intelligent than any of us, irrefutably so, and that it's capable of producing miracles that prove that it's not just some human operator in a call center or behind the curtain, but that it's quite literally something that is going to radically transform human society. You know, what's the difference between super intelligent AI and the alien invasion scenario? Well, aliens are fake. But what I'm saying is there seems to be, I think, indications that this might be the case. It's one and the same. It reminds me of that song, Savior Machine, 1969, David Bowie, where it has a line about President Joe handing over control to the Savior Machine that cures war and hunger. And something else. And it made me think back when President Joe Biden was in office. I was like, Savior Machine, it sounds like handing over control. Maybe they gave us an incompetent president and a corrupt president to turn people off the idea of human leadership altogether. Like, let's try this AI thing for a little bit. Jorge Glockington says, can you draw one of those little penguins with a wrench? Yeah, I was working on some art here and I seem to have used up all my ink, and you'll see there's a figure 8 over the eye. That's kind of one of the signature moves here because it's the infinity symbol. Looking at getting the office soon. I called and left a message. I have the location figured out. The next step is a 24/7 stream of replays and calls and then open phones. And in the meantime, I'm just going to be randomly, whenever I'm somewhere I can sit, we'll be doing updates and discussing the latest developments. And there have been some very significant developments in recent weeks. In the last 2 months. The last 2 months, as far as the think tank, its objectives, and what we're trying to convey, the last 2 months have really advanced us more than like the last 2 years. I mean, concurrent programming as a concept, as an observable phenomenon, was a major leap forward because it explains everything we've been seeing, that many have been seeing for many years with regard to the so-called predictive programming and its purpose. Then we refine the ideas, behind like news benders into history benders, coming up with viable explanations for what we're seeing, establishing world stage as a model and the long-term effects of media fakery. But then more recently, as we've expelled all the wrong or the bad or the faulty explanations for what we're seeing, as we've moved past these things, some have defaulted back from, well, these coincidences are so intricate, it must be a higher power. Like that used to be a talking point, but we shut that down. Because that's just a way of saying pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And what we have determined is more likely the case is that we're looking at systemic fakery. But some have gone back to, it's just a coincidence, which is the mainstream explanation. So alternative will say it's something higher than man, it's an AI, it's the demiurge, it's the devil. They'll run through all kinds of scenarios to avoid attributing what we're seeing to very clever magicians behind the scenes. So many of them are going back to, it's just a coincidence. And we've confronted this coincidence idea effectively thanks to Erica Kirk. Erica Kirk comes out portraying a role perfectly mirrored in a TV show that's still ongoing. And scene for scene, plot point for plot point, she's going with the program. So if you're looking at an actress, then presumably she's following a script. And if her script is completely congruent with her entertainment counterparts, then you can no longer say it's merely a coincidence. And we have a long list of so-called coincidences that we can refer to that reveal what is in fact a pattern. Not cherry picking, not selectivity bias, not Texas sharpshooter fallacy, not cherry picking at all. We are in fact merely pointing out what I think is just obvious. But we had to push back against a lot of entrenched opinions, what I call Trutherville orthodoxies, where people are in fact defending the world stage without knowing it. They're still trying to operate from the perspective contained within its parameters. And what I'm saying is that if that's your point of view, you will never have the right answers. Just like if you ask ChatGPT for the truth about something, its answers are going to mirror the mainstream. And so if you're going with the mainstream with your opinion formation, you might be thinking for yourself, but they put the guardrails in, and they ultimately limit your output. So your mind has been guardrailed. When we talk about guardrails, we're talking about guardrails in your mind. Like in your mind, if you have a built-in premise that they kill people in psyops, well, now you have an appeal to motive, you have the bad guy scenario, you got murders going on, and it also does this other thing. Because people will say, well, what does it matter if people are dying or not? Well, it matters for a lot of reasons. It makes no sense for them to kill people in simulated events. But moreover, when you rule out as a starting point that they're killing people, you have to actually think about, wait a minute, then what's the media's role? Because what it reveals is that the media is not just showing up to tragic events and turning their cameras on, but that they are in fact producing the events. So these simulated events are media productions, special effects included. They're not recording atrocities. So what this does when you get past the bloody guardrail is it removes the appearance of objectivity. No, the media is not objectively reporting. Lean Dion says, wager they add something to her tissue she constantly dabs. Oh, yeah. What is with that? And look, there's a scene in that Hulu show I referenced where the woman who takes over for her assassinated husband is confronted by his mistress. And she says, your grief, everyone said you were so dignified. Like they did for Erica Kirk. And she says, real grief is ugly, implying that she was faking it. And if you look at the soap opera right now around Erica Kirk, it's the mainstream Republicans getting mad at the woke right conspiracy Republicans for questioning the grief of a widow. Yeah, I saw that Dick Cheney passed away. I guess the libs are going to celebrate. I don't celebrate the deaths of my political opponents or even my enemies. I'll make an exception for MG. But generally speaking, I don't think we should be celebrating deaths. I think we should want our opponents to live to see how the thing ends. But yeah, Dick Cheney dying, very significant. It's going to take over the news cycles, and I guess people can finally stop talking about Erica Kirk's hot pants and her crush on J.D. Vance. All manufactured, by the way. She's like, Charlie Kirk, loved him, but look at J.D. Vance. The memes are fantastic. But that's an engineered perception. They know about optics, so they're very well aware of the optics here. So they created the perception for the critics that she and J.D. Vance are a thing and she's going to be vice president or something. They created this perception. I got normies telling me this stuff. And again, referencing the concurrent programming 2025, heads of state, Vice President Elizabeth Kirk. So this constant association with her and the vice president all ties into that. And then you look at the fact that the actress who plays the Vice President Kirk is the blonde femme fatale next to Charlie Kirkland when he gets shot in the neck at the boxing match where Tyler, the executioner, is fighting. So we have direct and ongoing correlations between 1998 Snake Eyes, 2025 Heads of State, 2025 Hulu The Tempest, and Erica Kirk's real-time performances on TV. And it's ongoing. That's why I'm calling this the Erica Kirk conundrum. If you want to say that concurrent programming is all coincidence, you've got to contend with this Erica Kirk thing. So I'm very pleased with the PSYOP selection of the last couple of months because it's been very revealing, very much, I think these are case studies. So the IPS think tank has taken the conversation out of the confusion and mysticism of Trutherville's interpretations. And what we have discerned here is real-time, ongoing, observable manipulation, not just of the news, but of our collective world view via the influence of mass media on history itself. That's what we have been examining here. That's the only conspiracy. Forget the deep state, forget who controls the world. These are all rabbit trails that lead you nowhere, that are designed to lead you nowhere. If you're really interested in truth, then you should be interested in the ongoing successful conspiracy, not theory, but conspiracy, to proactively create our history. And with this CK thing, what we have is an example of something planned decades ago. And that's a big deal. And you really have to think through the implications. But the fact that we have these transformative psychological operations that shift our entire news cycles, that start movements, that essentially what they've done with this is a generational psyop. They've redone the JFK thing, but they've rebooted, and it's all astroturf. It's not real grassroots, but they've basically created this new Christian nationalism. And again, Turning Point USA, I've said before this ever happened, that it was platforming the Turner Diaries. And if you don't know about the Turner Diaries, it's about the white nationalist uprising after their leader martyrs himself by crashing a plane full of bombs into the Pentagon. And that's the book that inspired McVeigh. So it's all intertwined. The psyops are all intertwined. They're all connected, same characters behind the scenes. And this is not disconnected from that. So it's a major event planned decades ahead of time. Jorge Glockington says, we're beyond the guardrails, we're observing and breaking them down. Yeah, and we've broken them down for ourselves. That's how we achieved what we call the off-world stage perspective. But we're confronting them now. Because, first we're like, let's go ahead and quarantine. Let's purge. Let's get rid of the chemtrail gooners and the Mandela affected and the video game characters. Let's purify our ranks. Let's make sure that we're all upholding the same standards of evidence and that we all have the same premise when it comes to the world stage is an optional worldview that's the result of a worldview monopoly. But now that we've consolidated and we've codified it, that's why I put this book out, Handbook for the Recently Deprogrammed. Now we can actually start confronting the people who are still held behind those guardrails. Like, I don't see people saying false flag as much as they used to. I see the word staged has replaced it. That's progress. There has been some significant progress in these areas. But this is what I mean by perspectives. If somebody says it's a false flag, well, that tells you that they exist in a subset of the mainstream on the right-hand side of the political horseshoe. It tells you where they are. It tells you what premise they've accepted, meaning people die in psyops, and then you know where they're going to go. They're going to go get their Kool-Aid at Alex Jonestown. Plain Dakota says, Tim, have you ever tried to socially hack these people? Like, what if we try to get as close as we can on the phone to Erica Kirk? No, I have not. And I've seen this tactic of attempting to confront crisis actors. Bad idea. I see a lot of the focus on crisis actors as misdirection. We should be asking who wrote the script. No, I mean, the best I do is I troll these people on Twitter, but I don't do it expecting a response. I do it to make a record of the fact that we have these opinions and we're putting it out there publicly. And they know we know. Like, Candace Owens knows Charlie Kirk is not dead. And if she listened to this, she would know, oh no, this podcast has a clue. Good thing that they're not platformed, acknowledged, or in any way a threat to our status quo. Because the world stage only entertains mainstream and alternative. It does not entertain the off-world stage perspective. There's no platform for it, which is why we're building this. I mean, if you look at how it's a duopoly, it's a closed system between the mainstream and the alt. The off-world stage perspective does not have a platform in here. We don't exist to them. However, there's a growing number of people in alt media who are questioning the fundamentals of CK, asking if it was squibbed. Well, those answers will not be found looking for a second shooter, third shooter, fourth shooter, or blaming Israel. Those answers will only be found if you include the additional material that we are inclusive of here, specifically the special effects and the intention behind fake events, which is, of course, history bending, news bending, worldview manipulation. So I know based on the responses on X, just regular users talking about things, I know there's a lot of people who are capable of taking and have taken, in this instance, the off-world stage perspective. What will really open them up to this concept is when they recognize how many events are actually analogous to the CK event and what the role of people like Candace Owens actually is. Misinformation, misdirection, red herrings, leading you down well-paved rabbit trails, wasting your time and keeping you locked into the false premise that the event was real as televised and we can just debate over who did it. Like, we got to pull people away from the premise that these people are investigating and recognizing that these are breadcrumb droppers. But there's a lot of people. There's a good number. So the next stage here is to get those who have seen through this event to recognize that they have a distinct point of view and they should stand on it. So when you make that switch, when you recognize your point of view for what it is, and you all know right now, your point of view is not mainstream mediation. And if you're here, your point of view is not MSM plus. It's not woke right. It's not some conspiracy rabbit trail. You have a distinct point of view when it comes to processing media. And when I say point of view, we're primarily just talking about media and therefore history and worldview. But this change in perspective has already happened for a lot of people, but it's never been platformed, so it hasn't been clearly defined. There hasn't been any strict terminology applied to create a framework. And that's what we have done. Plain Dakota says, what if we could get Candace Owens on the phone with clever social hacking and recording it? I would have no interest in it, to be honest. I have no interest in it. I think what we're better off doing is talking about them objectively, dispassionately, like we're anthropologists. Because we're not trying to reach her. Rather, we're reaching her subscribers. And one of my plans here as we get the 24/7 stream up and we want to onboard a lot of people, one of the objectives is to use AI agents to go down through Twitter. And I've already worked on this. I've developed many of these. So I've done all the groundwork for this. And what I'd like to do is just turn on some bots on X. And I have experience with it, so I've already plugged it in. But I want to have some bots that will specifically go to any account that agrees with us. Anybody who suggests that Charlie Kirk is not dead. Every single one of them, using AI, could be individually targeted, tapped on the shoulder, and recruited. Hey, look, you don't belong here in Alex Jonestown, and you're certainly not going to fit in on Q Street. Why don't you take the perspective that maybe media is full of crap and stop gaslighting yourself and recognize that you have a point? Because we have to have the confidence to stand on what we know to be true and not to be cowed by peer pressure to conform to the default. Like, why can't you guys just be open-minded and consider that this might just all be coincidence? Yeah, the default position is it's coincidence. That is the only explanation acceptable within the closed system of the world stage. Therefore, it's not open-minded. It's the only acceptable answer in a closed system. To be open-minded, it would have to be inclusive of other possibilities, like widespread systemic media manipulation and fakery. But that's not included in your closed system, so we are the open-minded ones. We're the devil's advocates. Anybody who's challenging us is therefore a mainstream advocate. Like some will say, well, I'm just going to be a devil's advocate. What if this event's really real? No, I'm the devil's advocate calling it fake. You're defending the mainstream media edifice architecture. It's pile of crap that we've documented. I mean, this is years of empirical research. This is observable, demonstrable fakery, patterns of fakery from a pathologically lying media. You want us to give it the benefit of the doubt? It's a little late for that. And as long as you're on the fence, you're straddling the fence, like, I don't know, maybe he's dead, maybe he's not. Yeah, okay, you're stuck in a cul-de-sac. If you can't say unequivocally whether or not you think he's dead or alive, then you have been nullified. Like, oh, I'm intellectually impotent. I can't actually come to a conclusion by myself. So what, you're going to default to the mainstream? What good is your mind if it's been deactivated? You can't arrive at a satisfactory conclusion? And my conclusion isn't, I know for a fact he's alive. My conclusion is, with all the additional information, peripheral information, I have every reason to think it was staged. I have no evidence supporting the idea he was killed. Everything we've observed contradicts that. So yes, I am stating that Kirk was an actor and he only died in a fictional sense. And there are so many hoax indicators built into this that if you're going to suggest that he really died, you've got a long list of things to contend with before you can rest on that. What's up, Anime Gematria? Clockwork says hopium's a hell of a drug. Jorge says I've been here since before Nipsey Christ. Yes. In fact, there's another death-faking rapper I need to look at. And we're going to get to all these. We're engaging in the next phase. So we've talked about history benders, and we're working on a series of mind maps on this. But now we're going to do something here, which I'm calling the Great Deconstruction. This is going to require the assistance of AI and a lot of people. So when we talk about having a platform for the off-world stage perspective, we're talking essentially about a third branch of media. So you got the mainstream, and you know all the sources. You can just go readily find mainstream sources, but alternative's a bit spread out, but it's still a self-contained universe. And if you go to alternative media, you know what you're going to find. You know, chemtrails, J-pills, false flags, HARP, and all the usual stuff. But what we are doing here is we are assembling the content that will define what I term the parallel media, this third branch of media. And it will scale up fast. But we need there to be a body of content that has this perspective built into it. And the way we will do this is we will go maybe the last 100 years, major event by major event believed to be PSYOP, retro auto hoaxing, and essentially breaking it down in the context of when it happened. So like when this happened, what elements were there indicative of it being a PSYOP, and include all this additional information, which would then put us in the category of informed disbeliever. Like, for example, the death of Robert F. Kennedy. Well, I think it's highly pertinent that he was driven over to the Ambassador Hotel by John Frankenheimer, who created the myth of the mind-controlled assassin with his Manchurian Candidate movie. The fact that he drove them over there to get assassinated by a mind-controlled assassin is one of these points that I think is worth noting. And we're going through PSYOP by PSYOP and attaching to it all of the relevant predictive and concurrent programming. And out of these, we're extracting the common denominators to ascertain how far back each of these events was possibly planned. So when it comes to the CK thing, we can pretty much, based on the common denominators and all the predictive content, we can pretty much rule in the possibility that the script for the assassination is at least as old as, but slightly older than Snake Eyes. So it was planned 27 years ago, 28 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. Maybe before the guy who played Charlie Kirk was even born, the role had already been prepared and scheduled. And that's the crazy part. Events being scheduled decades in advance. What does that say about anything? What does that say about voting? Or about anything about government itself? I mean, it's just how much of this is political theater? How much of it is the theater of Psywar? Do we live in a simulation? Not in a science fiction-y Nick Bostrom computer simulation, but is our worldview essentially a live exercise, completely fabricated? Tim, you got to watch Seconds, says Busy56 by Frankenheimer. It's about how this organization will fake people's deaths and give them reconstructive surgery. Okay, that's another key element as well. When you start looking at the directors whose work is reflected in contemporaneous psyops, guess what you find? You find that the same directors are doing the same thing for multiple movies. Like James Cameron, 9/11 predictive programming. James Cameron, in my opinion, had some role in the directing of the LA riots, the Cop City riots. I think Spike Lee directed the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd hoax. I think Jordan Peele directed The Death of Jordan Neely by Daniel Penny. I think Mel Gibson may have had a role in Butler, Pennsylvania, in directing it. And I think so based on the Braveheart correlations, which if you haven't looked into it, it's pretty deep. But the photography they did, staged, looks like the Braveheart cover, Trump's Braveheart avatar. Trump goes back to Butler 84 days later. The New York Post calls him Braveheart. There's a lot of nods to the directors of these events. I think when they drop a nuke, it will be a Nolan production. I think Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer, Fallout, and then you look at their previous works. I think it's reasonable to assume that when they nuke somewhere, we can attribute it to the Nolans. Jorge says, Mad Mike, rest in peace. Well, Mad Mike was a daredevil. First time we spoke, he's like, I got a 30% chance of surviving. Like, that's optimism. Not, there's a 70% chance I'm going to die. So I don't look at daredevil deaths as tragic. Although I would have preferred, as everyone else, that he had made the trip to space. Although, looking at the capsule, which was ominously nicknamed the Hemingway, you know, I really had some significant doubts as to whether the Raccoon trip would actually be survivable. Significant doubts. So if you don't know, the plan was you take a balloon to pull the rocket up 20 miles up, get, into the thinner air, and then you blast the rocket, and then from there, you're able to make it to the Kármán line. I mean, maybe it was survivable. I don't know. His successful jump of 2018 was financed by the Infinite Plane Society. You can read about it in the New Yorker. After our first few months, we were picking up steam, and then we got the steam-powered rocket behind us. The New Yorker did a story on it after it launched in the Mojave. But after that, it seems like this channel got targeted for a lot of suppression. But it was like moving forward pretty rapidly, this whole channel. Our numbers were going up. And at that time, we were mostly blasting NASA. But even then, I had said, this is bigger than NASA. This is about worldview. It's not about a potentially false debate over round or flat, but it's specifically about the big picture of the worldview and recognizing that the same media infrastructure that fakes events on the ground is correlated with the fake events above. That we shouldn't look at these things as separate. Yeah, look it up. Look up New Yorker looking for life on flat Earth. It was an interesting period of time, though. It was almost like the mass media was caught off guard, not by people who were saying the Earth was flat so much as by this extreme skepticism. Like, that was the real problem. Like, I don't say that, the flat earthers were dumb, confused, intellectually deficient, and like cringe, embarrassing. No, the label was something of a misnomer, because what you were really examining was a large body of media skeptics, because they weren't isolated to merely talking about NASA. We would talk about everything above and below in the same context. But to say that you were a flat earther, I've always said, you don't know the model yet. And the whole movement itself, the community, became infected by religion, which ruined it. Because now you had a bunch of fanatical Christian flat earthers who were basically obsessed with pushing their religion and calling everybody else satanic or evil. Like, they really just destroyed the whole thing. It went from, this is a big group of people, let's finance a trip to Antarctica, let's pay for Mad Mike to go to space, to get into church, Sunday school, read Bible verses, and hate science. And I was like, okay, this anti-science trend is a very bad development. Science is a methodology, not a belief system. And if you're confronting lies, you're not going to reveal the truth by referencing dusty old scriptures. You're going to find it by inquiry, by investigation and research. But I think it was deliberate. I think there was a deliberate plot to find this group of media skeptics, put them under a misnomer, attach them to some fringe religious cult, and then nullify it through ridicule and marginalization. And 90% of the people who were promoting it, the big channels that had the conferences, they were either feds or people with very dark pasts. We have firsthand experience with these individuals. People who are pulled out of cells, who should have been in cells, and who were put to work on YouTube propagandizing. Like, to be honest, I mean, just to be blunt, you have a conference of flat earthers, and every other person on the stage is either a sex offender or sex offender adjacent. That's a problem. And they're all claiming to be paragons of discernment because they saw through the deceptions and they're Bible flat earthers. And it's like, well, you're surrounded by some pretty slimy demonic entities. And I'm not just talking about Dearth. If you all know Dearth, Fed, F-E-D, Flat Earth Dave, with his intellectual property theft, stealing an app, and then, quote, accidentally leaking everybody's data on what was also termed a dating app, which is kind of alarming. Imagine getting on an app and then people know where you live. But anyway, we lifted a rock and we found some pretty surprising things, and it was systemic. In other words, and this isn't just limited to our little group, we had realized that there are quite literally plants all over the place, that a lot of the people with big channels are doing intel work. In fact, one of the big channels told me, I'm like, wait a minute here. Publicly, these people are going against the system, trying to expose the government and fraud. But then behind the scenes, they're doing like intel work for Denver police. They're handlers for parolees who've done horrible things, and just coaching them through the process of propaganda dissemination on YouTube. I mean, it's really quite amazing to watch. One of the strangest ones was the person who should have been in prison for life, but he was on parole, and he was doing street activism. And I was like, this guy's getting a lot of attention. And then we find out he's got this very dark past. And I thought, well, he's got to be compromised. And should he ever reach some level of prominence, that fact is going to come out and completely rug pull him. So it just seems like controlled opposition controlled it all. I was a little shocked that the Daily Beast, who had spent months spying on us in our Discord server, they said things about us. They said that we are the information equivalent of clear-cutting a forest. That's what they said about us. But they wouldn't talk to me. They wouldn't interview me, or they were basically looking for sound bites, but they went specifically to the predator on parole. And they said, what got you into this topic? And he said, I was just listening to some Alex Jones, and the YouTube algorithm put me down this rabbit trail, and now here I am, a flat earther. And that's when YouTube disabled the search filters and de-emphasized those types of videos. So you can see how they fed into the censorship agenda with their very talking points that were handed to them to deliver to mainstream media reporters. So in other words, you couldn't talk to a reporter unless you were a Fed or you were being handled by a Fed. And that was across the board. I was sort of an inconvenient person because I noticed these things and I talked about them. And I'm like, okay, so the conference organizer's best friend and his other friend made a 6-part documentary with a guy who's serving life in prison for abuse of minors. I mean, dark stuff. And I'm like, how do these people all know each other? Like, these are rare things, I would imagine. Like, you wouldn't expect that you go to a conference for any special interest, and you wouldn't expect that 90% of the keynote speakers are all essentially compromised parolees with police or feds breathing down their necks. I mean, it just seems really like, okay, this is what controlled opposition looks like. And if the alternative media is this bad, if the grassroots level conspiracy communities are this bad, imagine how bad mainstream is. Imagine what kind of monsters are behind these big operations. Jorge Glockington says, they don't want you to speak the truth because it exposes their lies. Well, what we're doing here is kind of interesting because what we are talking about is above the pay grade. It's a tier above the propagandists that we criticize. So, for example, Stu Peters, Candace Owens, Ian Carroll, Owen Schroyer, Alex Jones, none of them can even talk about what we're talking about. They can't. They don't, and they probably don't even get it. They probably don't even know. The programmers are easily 95% programmed, so they may not know the full extent of the fakery. So what I'm saying is, and this is very Alinskyite. If you look up Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, it talks about how a small minority can get a few numbers, but how they can leverage certain positions. And so in this case, we're outside of the experience of our opposition. Our opposition is stuck on promoting different rabbit trails, but mainly adhering to the mainstream, just from an alt perspective. They're not capable of seriously talking about squibs, media fakery, fake deaths, simulated events, because all these things are happening at a level above the bipartisan split. Like above left versus right is the fakery. The fakery's first. Both sides agree. So anybody who's in this system is not going to be able to address what we are bringing forth here. It's outside their realm of expertise, and they're not informed enough to deal with it. And if they were, they wouldn't be able to talk about it. They cannot entertain these ideas. I mean, just take, for example, like a Nick Fuentes. His entire worldview is built on the idea of Israel dominating the world and scapegoating them for all the evil things. And all his groypers, all the followers of that particular ideology are basically blaming one group for all these bad things. Now we come along and we say, hey, these bad things didn't actually happen. Well, if these bad things didn't actually happen, then of what value is your scapegoating narrative? Can you really claim that this group is oppressing you in any meaningful way? So they exist in a world of narratives. And we're here saying, no, their narratives are stories, and these stories are part of the history, the manufactured history. And history is just a collection of stories. So if they exist in the realm of stories, and we come out and we undermine those, it really just unravels their worldview. So my point of it is, I wouldn't worry about anybody trying to stop us from, quote, telling the truth or any form of censorship. I don't think we can even be acknowledged. They censor those who are the opposition publicly, or they go after them in civil court, like Alex Jones or Candace Owens. We got to shut them up. Or they ban you from Twitter. But you notice the only people being censored are those taking the anti-position. So pro versus anti. It's a triangulation tactic from Big Brother, splitting the masses into like the favored and the scapegoat, the good and the bad. There's a division here, triangulation at work. Well, we don't fit into that triangulation. They're not going to censor us because they can't even acknowledge us. And they cannot educate their propagandists to deal with us because we have a point, because we're correct. And they don't want these ideas being platformed. That's why someone said, could you somehow get Candace Owens on the phone or something? I'm like, no, she would never, none of these big channels would ever give 10 seconds to what we have to say. Because a number of their followers, a certain percentage, would actually look into it. And if you look into it and you think about it critically, you're going to have a minor paradigm shock. If you don't just retreat back into your Truman Show costume and just conform. Like what we're offering here is a paradigm shift. It's permanent. It's advantageous to take this position. It's rational, it's sensible, it's reasonable, and it's an alternative to the subjectivity of the mainstream false paradigm. It's not a cult thing. The mainstream is the cult. The mainstream is the closed system with hyperstitions, hyper-reality, augmentations, myths, martyrs, hoaxes, all attached to it. No, if anything, what we have embraced here is a form of objectivism reached through skepticism. I would say informed disbelief. We've traded in the mind war for a peace of mind and mass media deconstruction as a diversion, as entertainment, as philosophy. Like you notice here, we're not agitating for action. I'm like, let's go tell the politicians that the news is lying. Like, no, nothing like that at all. We're not even asking permission or for validation. We're just consolidating on this basis because we know that we're right. But when we have greater numbers, things might get interesting. And that's what I'm waiting for. Because I can't tell you what's going to happen. But based on previous experience, we may see this. I mean, I've seen a few hints. Like there's that movie 0 Day where there's these attacks in a subway in New York. Robert De Niro's the former president. He comes out to take a look. And there's some guy in the crowd and he says, nobody died. It's all a hoax. They're crisis actors. And the mob goes crazy and go after him. So, I mean, the best they can do is just try to say that you're crazy for not believing. But that's what religions have always done. J5 says, I know you're always talking about your phone getting super hot, Tim. Somebody lies told me that means you have people listening in and spying on you. You know, I thought about that. Let's say they had some people spying on us. Like, follow these guys in their server. Getting close. Like, at some point, they're going to realize that we have a point. And the people who are part of it, or who join us, who run with us, and don't get it, are very obvious. If you come in with a loaded question, a smuggled premise, an indirect inference to get us to accept your burden of proof, if there's any kind of agenda, it stands out. If you're on the fence or if you're confused, it stands out. Too many people are willing to say, well, I don't know either way. I wasn't there. And they wield their ambiguity and confusion like some kind of enlightenment or insight. Like, I'm so open-minded, I'm open to the possibility that the mainstream's right. No, that's not actually open-minded. Because again, you're talking about a closed system with a prefabricated model, a predetermined conclusion. You should be able to arrive at certainty, or if not certainty, clarity. But ambiguity is not good enough. Again, if you're confused, it means that the world stage has you, because it wants everybody in this place of confusion and subjectivity. They don't want you to have an objective grasp. Truman B3000 says, long story short, there's no government, just a secret society pretending to be one. They don't lead, they manage the illusion. Yeah, I'm with you on that. There's only one government, big capital G. There's only one religion. Mass media is the church. There's one, and it's the distillation of all the fake news leading up to today. It is the world stage. And we are run by a security clearance society. And they write the news so far in advance, these agendas are manufactured so far in advance, it seems like an elaborate alternate reality game / steam valve over which we ultimately have no control. But they want us to engage, so we have the illusion of control. There's this book by, I think it's Howard Bloom, The Lucifer Effect. A scientific exploration into the forces of nature. I think that's what it's called. But he talks about the illusion of control. About how, and these horrible experiments that are being cited, by the way. But basically, if you're in a cage and they electrocute the floors and you have a lever you can push and it turns off the pain, you have some control over your circumstances. And what they did in this experiment, and I don't know if I think it was rats or something, but they found that even if the switch didn't always work, like if it was intermittent, like it might or it might not shut off the electricity. But as long as it worked once in a while, they had some illusion they could control it. They endured it better. Their immune system didn't suffer, and they didn't become apathetic. But everything here seems to be about illusion. I think any anti-position is equivalent to the pro-position. Like, I don't think the chemtrail people or the climate change people are really all that different. You know, it's a distinction without a difference. They both accept the same core premise. Jorge says auto hoax or GTFO. Yeah, and that is one of our standards. When it comes to the Discord server, we're bringing people in greater numbers now. But the one thing you're not allowed to do is advocate for the mainstream media. Like, if you're not getting paid by CNN or Fox News, and you're advocating for their version of events, then you're just a propaganda mule. I have more respect for crisis actors. Wes Gematria says, do you think they're trying to control the weather, Tim? No. I mean, as far as like climate control goes, it's just air conditioning, what you have in your car, an umbrella, clothes. Like, we can do things locally, but the idea of the entire planet's weather changing is a reiteration of the flood myths, because it's always blamed on the West and on capitalism. So it's like, oh, you capitalists, your SUVs, your fossil fuel consumption, your overuse of natural resources, you're causing the weather to change. So the left blames the right. But then the right wing, they're like, it's your anti-geoengineering that's changing the weather. It's your weather weapons. So they blame the left and the secret government the left worships. So like, yeah, the secret government projects by the left are changing the weather. So both sides are agreeing, yes, man's changing the weather, but it's split. And one of my axioms here is, if any one of these psyops or events or situations is perfectly bifurcated, where both sides agree, but they blame each other, then it's a hoax. Wes says, what about the Committee on Weather Control Law passed in 1953, Public Law 256? I'd have to look into it. There's no evidence for it. And also should point out, this is a fact. There's no such thing as chemtrails. Like, there's literally no such thing. It's not even a superstition. It's an ignorantly, I guess, it's intentionally spread, but it's a ignorant take on a well understood phenomenon. Like, it's very well understood. And for somebody to try to say that the contrails are actually chemtrails without first debunking contrails and the conditions that result in their formation it's an argument from a place of ignorance. He says, I'll try to get you a link. I'm not interested in the link. I'm tired of all that claptrap. Climate change pushers are bad enough. I don't need anti-engineering weather modification pushers. Like, show me the evidence of climate change, and then we'll talk. Because I can point you, I can send you a link to the NOAA's website. I can send you a link to Al Gore's latest book. I can push the burden of proof onto you. Hey, if you haven't read Greta Thunberg's blog, maybe you should read that, because that will prove to you that climate change is real. Wes says, I don't believe in climate change. Exactly. You don't believe in climate change because you're on the right side of the bifurcation. So you believe in weather weapons, weather modification coming from government. And you find out through leaks. So the right wing finds out through leaks that the government is secretly weaponizing the weather. The left wing promotes climate change. And here you are, you say, I think the government is screwing with the weather and trying to send you proof. See, told you before you even told me that you were going to say that the government does it, the left does it, that you don't believe in climate change, but you believe the government's doing it. You fell into a bifurcated psyop, and based on your opinion on it, I know your point of view. Your point of view on this issue is MSM plus. You say a law in Congress isn't proof? Well, I'm pretty sure that if you look at the California Clean Air Act, which is why I had to pay the emissions on this truck, that there's proof by Congress, there's laws by Congress that said, yes, we are screwing up the weather, and because of global warming, we need to regulate your vehicles. So he says, just read it. How about let me, what you just said to me when you said just read it, you said, accept the burden of proof. So I'm going to tell you, why don't you go read Al Gore's books? Go read Al Gore's books, and then tell me that global warming's not real. So we don't accept that shifting of the burden of proof. You should be able to show me a picture of climate change. You should be able to show me evidence of it. You shouldn't tell me to go consult something that you find compelling. And again, I'm only pointing this out because this is uniform. Every single person who believes in weather modification will say climate change is a hoax. And they will say they found out through a secret government leak. So that's reverse psychology. It's marketing. One of the tactics in marketing is some people don't want to be sold something directly because they're free thinkers. So you got to let them discover it for themselves. So the mainstream consumers consume mainstream slop. Like, feed me more climate change propaganda, and they just eat it up. But you, as a free thinker, you need to find stuff on your own to believe it. So what do? They leak some government documents, they drop some breadcrumbs in Trutherville, you pick that up, and you arrive at your conclusions seemingly independently, but they're not independent. Your conclusion is not independent any more than climate change believers. These are equivalents. Portal says climate change is cyclical, period. If it even exists. If it even exists. I'm suggesting here that it's a reinvention of the flood myth where you blame the wicked. And the wicked in today's context is the West, are the polluters, are those who are vampirizing Gaia. And so when it comes to worldview, in my worldview, the government is not secretly modifying the weather. So I'm not worried about a flood. I'm not worried about climate chaos. I can sleep at night. But if you're a mainstreamer, you're worried about floods. If you're a truther, you're worried about weather weapons. So now you worry, the person who brought this up is worried about weather weapons. So imagine walking around on a nice day, and now you find all the clouds to be suspect, and you wonder if your climate's being tampered with and if the world will survive. It's like entering a doomsday cult. That's why I say you're in an advantageous position to take the anti-anti position of the off-world stage. You can let go of their fear propaganda that you have no evidence for. You can let go of these assumptions that actually have a negative effect on you. Climate change, or rather chemtrails, may not exist, but psychosomatically you could acquire a pretty nasty case of chemtrail lung if you believe it enough. But these useless fears do add to your overall stress, and they do polarize you, because now if you believe in anti-geoengineering, well, I guarantee now you're anti-vax. Now you're anti whatever the government's putting forth. Now you're going to be censored for your opinions. It all locks you into a box. And it's controlled anyway. So anyway, my point of it is, if you believe in weather modification or you believe in climate change, you believe in the exact same thing. You just disagree on who's causing it. Like, no, we're not causing it with our environmental abuse. It's being caused by the secret government. And the left is like, no, no, no. It's being caused by you guys. So you guys agree. And you're polarized, you're split down the middle, you're triangulated, which means you're controlled. And a lot of their control system is based on triangulation. This is why I refer to the political horseshoe and the bifurcation, the split. Because as long as you're participating in the split, you're being triangulated. I've had people break up with me over this. Like Jake, the awake orifice, used to listen, he used to call in, and he's like, I can't call in anymore. I'm not going to listen to Infinite Plane Society anymore because you don't believe in chemtrails. Like, you see how divisive that is? That he has a big audience of people who are world stage aware, who know about PSYOPs, but they're not going to come to the IPS because we disagree on chemtrails. J5 says chemtrails heal your lungs. Yeah, actually, you can go on eBay and you can actually find bottled chemtrails. You can look it up. Because what you're really talking about is ice. What people call chemtrails, yeah, it's just ice. Anthropogenic cirrus clouds, it's ice. That's how you know it's not a spray, because there's so much volume, you couldn't pack that all into one airplane. So when somebody says, what are they spraying? That's a loaded question that implies a substance being injected into the atmosphere and not merely the condensation caused by hot jet exhaust interacting with rarefied air at extremely cold temperatures. Because every couple thousand feet you go up, the temperature drops a few degrees. It's freezing up there. All right, this has been great. My battery's about to die. We'll continue this conversation later today. I'm working on the 24-hour stream, but I might begin by using Restream and just doing rebroadcasts on a schedule. So there'll be a lot of activity on a lot of my other channels. But we're going to just, we have to increase the signal. We have to send the signal so we can blow this up. So if you're not subscribed, go to ips.monster. JT33 says, Jake the Awake is killing it with the silly YouTube thumbnails. Well, you have to hand it to him. He's good. He's good at marketing. He's good at maintaining a position in YouTube, and he's preserved his channel. And he doesn't fool around with it. So I definitely respect his work, and I'm glad he's able to make a living off of it. And we may not agree on everything, but we have enough of an agreement that I consider us to be on the same team. But there's no chemtrails over the off-world stage. They're only inside of the Truman Show. So it's nicer out here. Yeah, I should start doing some clickbait thumbnails as well. I really should. I'll give some thought to it. I'll take some pictures. I got to find some kind of I can't copy his gimmick. I can't get a hat. There's got to be something I can do, though. We'll talk about it in Discord. We'll see you there.